Hey, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our next session at the AECFCS FinCrime Canada Summit. It's great to be back with you. Hopefully, you were able to catch some of that last session on privacy-enhancing technologies. I did hear from some of our attendees that they had some difficulties getting in. Looks like some were able to get in, some weren't. We are going to get a recording of that session. We will be able to share it. So if you weren't able to attend the last session, be on the lookout for that recording. We'll make sure we get it to you in some type of way if you're interested in viewing the session. Again, apologies for the tech issues there. Sometimes you try something a little bit more complicated and daring, and it doesn't always work out for you, which also plays into the theme of this session, which is, can you trust the machine? I am thrilled to be having this conversation with Nicola Eschenburg from BA Systems Applied Intelligence. I'm going to briefly introduce her and bring her into this conversation very shortly. I do have some logistics and housekeeping to run through. And yeah, I see a couple people saying that they weren't able to get into the last one. Again, apologies for that. Like I said, we will get the recording for that session and share it with you after the fact. So it wasn't hosted on our platform. We were trying to co-host it with another association, and sometimes there's glitches in technology, which we'll talk about a little bit on this session too. So again, thank you for being here. And in case you were not on the previous starting session, I'm Brian Spota-Kindle with the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists, who are hosting this event. And it is a real honor to have all of you in Canada and beyond join this session. So thanks for being here. If you have any tech issues on this session, fortunately, this is a much more known quantity. You should refresh your browser. That's going to be your first and best place to start. This is a browser-based platform. So if audio cuts out, slides don't seem to be advancing, we're not using too many, but any of those issues, try refreshing your browser. You can also try closing out, rejoining if you're not using Chrome or Firefox. I recommend those browsers for all of the sessions on On24 throughout the next 3 days, the rest of this day, tomorrow, and Thursday. Customer service event support at acfcs.org can help you out with any of your event needs. And a big thanks again to all of our sponsors, especially BAE Systems, who you'll be hearing from Nicola in just a moment. So thanks to them, we were able to bring this event to you free of charge. Please help them help you by visiting the exhibit booth and learning more about everything that they have to offer. The virtual exhibit booth is on that GRIP platform. Use that GRIP platform, as mentioned, to network with attendees. You can set up private chats. You can set up even meetings. There are some speed networking sessions. So the knowledge that is on display in this session, in this event, is great, but so is the community, and we urge you to take advantage of that. All sessions are being recorded. They will be posted to the site and available through December 3rd. And as mentioned, that previous session, we will get the recording and make it available to you after the fact. So certificate of attendance is also available to you for all of these sessions. You do need to attend 80% of the session and complete the survey. So be on the lookout for the survey at the end of the session. It should pop up automatically. You can also find it in that row of little bullet points in the row of icons on the bottom there, if you want to fill it out before the end of the session. Join us on Goose Chase. This is our app where we're playing games, having fun. You can download it in the App Store. Use the code FACEOFF, daily challenges, and another good way to connect and network. Speaking of fun, join us tonight at 4:30 for the opening night reception. We're having live dueling pianists, among other fun and games. And you can actually help us choose the songs you want to hear. So like everything else, we try to make this as interactive as possible. On a more serious note, you heard in the first session about Project Shadow. We talked about online child exploitation. We also talked about human trafficking, since there's a connection between those. And we are working with Tamea's cause. Many of you may know Tamea Nagy in Canada. She has done great things for survivors of human trafficking. We are raising funds for to support survivors of human trafficking, and we will match donations of up to $2,000 that are raised during this event. So if you're able to, please consider donating whatever you can, and you will find links in the resources section. I believe it's there for this session. It will also be there for tomorrow's session. Tamea, as well as 2 other survivors of human trafficking, will will be presenting some survivor-led training tomorrow. So we're going to be doing a few poll questions during this session. I put one up here. For those out there in the FinCrime compliance space, if you are doing something involving AI, machine learning, I want to hear from you as to where you're at. Do you have an active solution? Are you piloting something? Do you plan something in the next year? You don't currently have anything and are not planning on implementing anytime soon, or you just have no idea. You want to hear us tell you more about why you can or can't trust machines before you make any kind of conclusion. So go ahead and provide your answer here. Again, if you haven't been on a previous session, click the answer in the slide window where the poll is displaying, and then look for a submit button, hit the submit button. And again, you can customize your console in any type of way you want. So you can make the slide window larger, the video window, move us around, whatever you'd like to do. And with that, I'm thrilled to welcome Nicola. Thank you for being patient while I made that big speech. It's a pleasure to have you here during this session. And Nicola is the venture lead of the FinCrime testing systems at BA Systems Applied Intelligence and the Futures team, and doing really interesting things involving using synthetic data to test out FinCrime systems. And she is a senior product innovation and strategy professional. She has had, at this point, several years in various increasingly senior roles at BAE, starting in cybersecurity and moving into the FinCrime space more recently. So, Nicola, we are thrilled to have you here and looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and maybe while we wait for some more of these poll results to come in, can you guys start off by giving us a little background in the space, your work, and how at BAE and how it fits into the topic of conversation?
Sure. So, as you said, I work in our innovation team, so I've had various roles within that. And really what got me really interested in the whole data and trust piece is not the challenges of getting AI and ML adopted, but understanding why we're struggling with those challenges. And I think that's a big piece of what we try and do within our innovation team is understand why something's a problem. No, I love my Henry Ford analogy, and to anybody who tells me he never actually said this, I don't care. I love it. So tough. But you know, Henry Ford always said, if you ask people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. And if you'd just gone with what somebody said they wanted, we would not have cars today. So for us, it's very much about going, well, why do you want the faster horse? Do you need to get from A to B quicker? Do you need to get your letters there? Can you not feed the horses? You know, etc. And that's really where we started looking at this whole data and trust piece and trying to understand why, you know, the technology is there, give or take, but the adoption isn't necessarily. And I don't think it's just a regulatory issue, although clearly that does come to play. So why aren't we getting there? And what can we do to kind of help shift the needle? So I did a big piece of research on that probably a year or so ago. Then I took over leadership of the current venture I'm looking at. And again, that's very much about how can you trust that you're detecting what you're looking for. You know, banks have got all these compliance programs. They very much want to detect, you know, you talked about human trafficking, sexual exploitation. Banks are looking for this. How can they be confident they're actually detecting it? And you know, and that's where I think the theory hits the reality, so to speak. So yeah, really excited to be talking about this topic today.
Excellent, yeah. And you know, it's an interesting one because we talk a lot about sort of the hard aspects, I guess you could call them, of machine learning, AI, and these data-driven tools in financial crime compliance. You know, how do they work and how you implement them and that type of thing. But you know, what I think a lot of the audience experience is that they are end users of these tools. We have folks at varying levels, but we have compliance officers, we have investigators, we have analysts, and they are being equipped with these tools, or they're piloting, or they're being asked to sit on committees that review this. And so they're not necessarily developing them or getting into the technical aspects of them, but they do have to trust them. They have to trust that they work. They have to trust that the data underlying them is accurate and complete. They're not missing things. And they don't necessarily know how to trust them or why to trust them. So I think that's a very important thing that, as you said, your research and your work is indicating that trust and these sort of, you could call them soft issues, but they are extremely important, are very relevant in this space. So let's see the results of the poll here. Most common answer is just not sure. So I think that's an honest one, right? Like I mentioned, a lot of people are end users here, and they're just not sure what their institution is necessarily doing in its full compliance program. But we do have about 24% that have active AML active AML, AI and machine learning solutions currently operating, and about another 8% that are piloting solutions. So Nicola, does this surprise you at all? Does anything jump out at you here?
So one thing does surprise me. There was a survey I was chatting to a colleague who actually is involved in creating said machine learning. I'm very much about as we said, the soft skills and the psychology around it. I was having a chat to one of my colleagues who's very involved in creating and writing. And he was telling me about a survey he'd read, I think it was from last year, of 850 compliance professionals. And 66% of that survey had said that they were being actively encouraged by the regulators to innovate and model and basically try and push the boundaries. And I think it was just under 60% said they actively had or were expecting to have in the next 12 months. So, no, I don't know if that's just a difference in region, but it's quite interesting to see that difference there.
Yeah, and I didn't plan this, but I actually took a snapshot from that survey. I promise we didn't plan this. This is just dumb luck. I actually took a snapshot from that survey of some of the results that Nicola just mentioned. That survey was more heavily focused on the Asia-Pacific region, that more of respondents from that region. But so interesting results here. About 15% said they're piloting. 21% implemented. So we had, I think, about 23 and change who have said they've implemented. So a little bit higher in Canada, a little bit less, say, no current plans to adopt, but kind of tracking with the results of that survey as well. So so it looks like, folks out there are implementing, piloting, but there's still a large bulk that simply don't know or do not have current plans to adopt. And I think your point is very valid that the technology is there, right? There's this, I've heard it referred to as the trough of disappointment, where there's a bunch of solutions that came out that maybe weren't actually AI or machine learning. Maybe they were just software, or maybe they just overpromised. And I think people, it didn't necessarily deliver, or it didn't deliver in a timely manner, or it didn't deliver in a complete manner, whatever the case may be. And people kind of lost trust. And lost sort of faith in the solutions. And this took place like in various industries. It wasn't just in FinCrime. And one example that was pretty famous was Watson, an IBM solution, and they developed this Watson AI tool, and then one of the applications they developed was for oncology, for cancer research, and for assisting cancer doctors to help make decisions and combing through patient data, then making recommendations on treatment. But what they found was, in part because it was kind of a black box to doctors that didn't totally understand how it was arriving at these conclusions, was that it didn't really supplement their work in a meaningful way, because if the AI recommended what they were going to do, then they were just going to do that anyway. And if the AI didn't recommend what they were going to do, they dismissed the AI, or they thought that it wasn't meaningful. So they did not, again, have that level of trust to utilize that and to take a step back. And from a different direction, there's also this famous Microsoft chatbot. Microsoft launched an AI chatbot. They put it on Twitter, and I think within about 24 hours, it started to make various racist and sexist and awful statements based on users teaching it to basically say this. And so that goes into trust in data and bias that can be put into data without you necessarily realizing it, which we'll talk about too. So let's take a step back, and now that we've kind of framed it a little bit about why we're talking about this, I want to hear, Nicola, from you as to some of the three levels of trust. You've talked about, in the context of financial crime prevention, you've written in the past about the three layers of trust. Can you explain what they are and how they apply to the use of data and machine learning in this context? Uh-oh. Nicola, have we lost you? Or is that an issue on my end?
Don't hear a bee, so might not be just you.
Okay. Well, we'll wait a moment for Nicola to rejoin the conversation. And in the meantime, I'll take a look at the Q&A, and see if I can field a question here. I see a question from Mirzad. Mirzad, thanks for joining. And the question is essentially, in the near future, will machines overpower or surpass human thinking? Everything I've read says no, that this is not something that's going to occur in any sort of conceivable timeline. Obviously, things can change, but I think thinking of a machine intelligence as comparable to human intelligence is also something that's not necessarily equatable. At least in our current incarnation of AI, artificial intelligence or machine intelligence is essentially nothing like a human intelligence. Just entirely different kind of processes. So, Nicola, I think you're back now. Yeah, and I don't know how much you caught of that last question, but I just wanted to if you can frame up this concept of trust here, and talk about the three levels of trust in the context of financial crime.
Yeah. Perfect. So I think for me, it comes back to the focus on AI and ML always seems to be about the fact it's maths, it's hard coded. Like you said, it's the hard skills. And actually, that tech's there, give or take. But what's not there is often the understanding that it's human. Humans are using it. You need to understand the psychology behind those who are going to use it if it's going to be a success. So there's sort of three areas of trust that I think are critical. And one's dispositional. So that's, an individual's tendency to actually trust automation, AI, ML, pick your acronym, based on factors such as their culture, their age, their personality. These are things that we as professionals can't impact, but they're things that we can understand and try and say, well, if this is an older person who isn't as au fait with technology, perhaps we need to rethink the user experience, how we present it to them, versus a younger person who can easily just pick something up and they trust it because they've grown up with it. Then you layer onto that the situational. And this is really where the specific context comes into play. And it's really based on the individual's ability to evaluate the performance of the algorithm. So like you were saying about Watson, can the doctors understand how it's doing what it's doing, why it's spitting out what it's spitting out, and really understand why they should trust it or not? One of my completely out of context but favorite example I've got is an example of a system in a submarine. So a system on a submarine will likely have radar and sonar. Now, those two systems work differently depending on what the weather's like. But obviously, if you're beneath the ocean, you don't know what's happening up there. So if you have your system saying that there's a bad storm, you know that radar's not going to work so well and you need to rely on sonar. So, it's that kind of knowing where the data's come from to help you know that you can trust it. And also, if the data's faulty, that being flagged up, again, instinctually helps you trust the system. And then the third piece is really, it's learned. What past experience have you got that's relevant to those systems? What design features does it have really that help you trust? And I think those all come together to play on the psychology of, do I trust the system or actually, no, this is quite dodgy. I don't think I want to go anywhere near it.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting when we drill down on it, the contextual, the situational, and then the learned trust. Let's drill down a little further and talk about, from the different user perspectives I mentioned before. We have a lot of, end users, the investigators who are getting tools to hopefully support their investigation that are based on data sets and then have machine learning or artificial intelligence applied to them. So what have you seen in your work about, trust issues for this type of audience? Are there consistent things that make them, not trust when they have a tool that's supposed to be supporting them, but, they're not necessarily trusting that it's effective or using it correctly or whatever the case may be? And what does it take to, know that you can trust something?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of factors here. So in terms of knowing how you can trust something, who's testing the testers? So that comes back to knowing why something's spitting out what it is. As a company, we've looked at various AI systems that test AI systems. And that's great in theory, but if they're also a black box, you just got a black box on top of a black box, and call me cynical, but who do you trust more? So I think the challenges come when a system's thrust upon somebody, whether it's the powers that be from on high dictate that thou shalt have the system, and the users don't know how it works, why it works, and suddenly they're just being told, go and investigate this thing, and their experience and instinct says, actually, no, this isn't right. What we've seen working really well is it's a bit more of a slowly catch a monkey approach. So it might be a case of you've got an unsupervised machine learning system to, if we're looking at triage, for example. So you've got your rules that will spit out your alerts, and alongside that you might have an unsupervised machine learning system which will also feed up alerts, and this is why the alerts come, this is the detail that's come into it, this is why it matters. And that slowly builds up the confidence because you've got the two systems running alongside each other. And it's not a case of we're switching this off and switching this on. We're running the two alongside each other, and you can see how they perform against each other. And that gives you, the user, the chance to evaluate, grow your confidence, but also gives you the chance to say, actually, no, this isn't working for me. And hopefully at that point you can say, this isn't working for me and this is why. And I think that's what's the other critical thing is it needs to be that sort of human-machine interaction, in that you shouldn't just have an algorithm thrust upon you. The humans need to be setting the parameters. The investigators are the experts. They know what they're looking for. They know what the risk appetite of their particular bank is, and they're the ones who should be able to tweak and adjust and work with the system so it's supporting and augmenting, not trying to dictate or replace.
I think it's a great point. And I mean, I'm wondering, do you ever see examples of when institutions get it wrong, and particularly get it wrong by not giving the right people like a seat at the table, so to speak? Are there implementations where they try to bring something in and say, we're going to adopt this solution that on paper seems innovative, but they don't bring the investigator or the analyst, or that voice and that expertise into the actual deployment and development, and as a result, it struggles. Do you have any experience with that?
I think there's quite a few examples of that, actually, and I think it comes down to not understanding how the systems themselves work. And think you can throw a data scientist at the problem, but typically it's hard to find a data scientist that understands financial crime as well. I think this is something we've heard time and time again that banks struggle with. And there's the case of, let's take insurance or mortgage applications. I think we've all heard the classic stories of people being declined for insurance or a mortgage because they don't meet the criteria. And even though a bank has tried desperately hard to remove bias by saying, well, we're not going to look at age, we're not going to look at race, we're not going to look at gender, without considering the broader parameters. So if we take the case of a mortgage company or a bank offering mortgages, they might be saying, well, we're going to use an algorithm to decide whether or not you get the mortgage. We're not going to be looking at gender, and we're not looking at race, because clearly that's a bad thing to be looking at. That shouldn't impact. But what that hasn't been thought through is the fact that certainly we know this has happened in the States. Certain zip codes are associated with certain races. And it's the same in the UK over here. Certain nationalities tend to congregate in certain areas, like seeks like, I guess, in a sense. And what that means is that, yes, you've cut out, so we're not looking at race, we're not looking at gender, but there are other factors that can be correlated. And an AI system simply looks for correlations, and it might say, well, typically people from this particular zip code default on mortgages, they're a risky bet, therefore we're not offering it to anybody in the zip code. But what a person looking at this would go, well, actually, that zip code tends to have people of a certain ethnic minority. So therefore that's, and that's a form of bias that inadvertently comes into systems, which is why I think you desperately need a variety of people. So you need the data scientists, you need the investigators, and somebody like me to ask the stupid questions and go, well, why have you done that? It doesn't make sense.
No, I think it's a fantastic point. And inherent bias is a tremendous challenge in the AI machine learning space. Getting some interesting questions in from attendees, and thank you for that. Please do continue to ask questions, type questions into the questions box, and we will field your questions throughout this presentation. I do have a poll question up on the screen here. I will get to questions in just a second, but I want to encourage you to respond to this poll. And this is, do you feel that machine learning or AI systems are a champion challenger to the traditional rules-based approach to compliance? And your options include, yes, you can see it replacing rules, finally replace the rules-based monitoring that has produced so many of our false positives. Or yes, but not yet, once trust levels are higher, as we've been discussing. No, it's complementary. Nicola, you already talked about doing the, what did you say? Go slow, catch the monkey or something? It was a fantastic way of putting it.
Slowly catch a monkey.
Slowly catch a monkey. Yeah, use the slowly catch a monkey approach, and kind of have these running side by side. Or no, I can't see the regulator agreeing to wholesale change. And that's the next point I want to turn to is regulatory trust. There's these levels of trust. So we talked about some, ways that you can build trust on the individual perspective by having it as a sort of parallel process, by, looking at it from those three levels of trust. One of those being learned trust. You can help teach people, train people, explainability, making sure the system's explainable can build trust. But what about when we go up to the regulator level? What do you need? And what do you see as, either encouraging or discouraging signs in your work with regulators as to, their trust in some of these innovative tools?
So I do think sometimes the regulators are stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place. So there are some of the biggest banks in the world that we have all know and heard of are very keen to switch to a purely ML-led system, switch the rules off. We know that they're campaigning hard for that. But fundamentally, the regulator still has a duty of care and responsibility to the victims, to society. And whilst rules-based systems are far from perfect, it does work to a degree. So until the regulator has that level of confidence that a different system is going to work, I can see why they're a bit nervous about just going, right, fine, we'll switch to this other system. So for me, I think a large piece about it is it's taking the regulators on a journey. The regulators fundamentally, I think, have a different goals, different perspectives than banks do, perhaps. Banks are focused on delivering value to customers, to shareholders. Regulators are very focused on making sure that people are protected and that we're protecting our economies and our people. So, it's, at some point, those are potentially a little bit loggerheads in terms of how we achieve that. So for me, it's about working with the regulator, taking them on the journey, showing them that this is what can be done, and this is how it can be done. And that really comes back to the explainability piece. So, the regulator is very concerned about making sure that, children aren't being trafficked and abused, or wildlife crimes aren't being committed, or whatever their particular concern might be. They're not going to just trust that a system they don't understand is going to be catching what it is going to be catching, which is where the whole explainability piece comes in. Understanding why a recommendation has been made, understanding where the data's come from to create that. But what I think is really encouraging is around the world, we are seeing regulators pushing innovation and really being very encouraging about it. I mean, MAS over in Singapore ran a hackathon, and they produced principles and guidelines on fairness and ethics and transparency in AI. Now, over here in the UK, the FCA has its sandbox. We've played around in ourselves, and that's really giving us a safe space to experiment and see what can we achieve if we have a safe space to test out ideas, test out algorithms, and we don't have to worry about doing something that's technically illegal. Strong word, but it's probably a good one, because you're doing it within a safe space with safe data, and you're not actually impacting anything in the real world. So we are seeing the regulators start to say, well, we understand that you as banks are swamped with alerts. We understand the system isn't working, and the SARs, the SDRs, the volume of those that are filed and not looked at. What's the point? Nobody gets into financial crime because they like filing paperwork to go to nowhere. So I think there really is, I am seeing a sea change in this, and I think the regulators are pushing it. I think probably not quite as fast as industry might like, but then I think the onus is on us as an industry to actually take them on the journey with us, rather than just going, it works, let us do it. And that, again, it comes back to that trust piece and understand the customer, and in the sense, the regulator is the customer. What's their natural response and trust levels of AI and ML, and what can you do to help them feel comfortable around it?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, all challenges are well, maybe not all, but most technical challenges also have a component of human psychology, at least when human beings are involved in interacting with the technology in a heavy way, which obviously they are in the FinCrime compliance space. So again, having that psychological component of it is critically important, and that is what's going to, in many cases, define the difference between success and failure in some of this. So, but as we already heard twice during the event so far from FinTrack, we've heard from two different FinTrack representatives who have emphasized, innovation and the desire to implement, tools and including machine learning and others to take on some of these challenges. So I think you're totally right that the regulatory viewpoint is changing. And let's see, based on the results, only 5% said that they can't see regulators agreeing to a wholesale change. So obviously out there, people do think that there will be the ability to do this, and a full close to 50, actually over 50% say that either they can see it replacing rules, or that it will likely replace it when trust levels are higher. So 40% say it's complementary. It should stay that way. So so really interesting results there. I think that speaks to a growth in trust, maybe learned trust in this case when we're talking about the three levels. Yep. So I'm going to put another poll question up and let you submit. I'm interested in hearing, where do you think machine learning could help you most, and if you're already using it, then maybe this is an easy answer. We are making you pick one here, so you got to choose one of these, even if you think it might be multiple. That's just the way the poll works. So tell us which one you think you could most help with. It's a choose one answer, and let us know what you're thinking. And if it's something else besides what's here, please let us know in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'll turn to some attendee questions. Interesting question on false negatives. We talk a lot about false positives and false positive reduction in the, using some machine learning tools. But what about false negatives? How are developers of AI and machine learning tools working to address false negatives? And is it even being talked about? Any thoughts on that?
Thank you for emphasizing the false negatives before I riffed off on the false positives front. All about triage. So I think the false negatives one's interesting, actually. And it's not one I've personally heard talked about so much. I think in part because there are so many false positives. It's a question of trying to get those numbers down so you can focus more on the false negatives. Now, I know it's something that we're looking at internally at BAE. Now, the product I work on, as I said, produces synthetic data. So we've got a pool of known bads hidden in a pool of innocent background actors. So that gives us the chance to actually hone the rules and say, what are we picking up versus what are we not picking up? And I do think synthetic data has something to offer here, because the one challenge where you've got a pool of, like a huge pool of unknown data, is if you don't know that there's a positive or a negative in there, how do you know if it's a false positive or false negative? How do you know what you're missing if you don't know what you don't know? So I think looking at different approaches, using data where you know what the answer is, I think is certainly an approach that could work really nicely to try and reduce those false negatives.
Great, thank you for that. Another question coming in is, where do you get the raw data? So we're talking about tools, AI, machine learning tools. They obviously require a lot of data from financial institutions, and very sensitive about actually sharing that. So where do you get data if you want to train an algorithm, if you want to train a machine learning tool, and you need all this data? How can you do that?
That's an interesting question. So some of it, we are experimenting with synthetic data for that exact reason. It is sensitive. Banks often aren't keen to share the crown jewels, be it for privacy reasons or, everybody wants everybody else's data, but nobody wants to share their own data. As anybody who's ever tried to work in a public-private partnership will know. So again, that's why we're exploring the synthetic data route, and I think that is bearing some fruit. And otherwise, it comes down to partnerships. So can you work with a bank? What levels of data do you need to train that machine? And certainly, now this particular example isn't in the financial space, it's in the government space, which I think is actually potentially even more important, because there's that even higher level of privacy concern. And what our machine learning teams there do is create synthetic data to initially train a model on, prove that the model in theory can do what it's meant to do, and then they run it over the actual data for a limited period of time. But what that means is that they're not starting from scratch with the data, because the teams will have limited access to the proper data for a limited period of time. They may only be able to work in a room. The data cannot leave that particular room. So they're not starting from scratch. They've got a model that in theory works, and then they can tune that to the data they've got access to. But it really comes back to being in an environment where a bank's willing to cooperate and work with a company like BAE or whoever. And that just comes back to trust. And I think you need to be an established partner. And if you're not, you're going to have to look at other routes.
Yeah. Yeah, it all comes back to trust. We picked a good theme for this one, apparently. So go ahead and respond to the poll. We're going to look at the results in just a second. I have some interesting comments from attendees who are noting, criteria for assignment of weight to risk factors could be another usage. Another contribution potentially to help us identify trends to be more proactive, addressing areas of concern in financial crime, which is interesting, using machine learning to potentially do some, threat intelligence or trend spotting. So great comments from the audience here. One thing, so last chance on this poll, and then let's see the results of what people think. All right, so an even tie between triage and risk scoring alerts and identifying unknown unknowns. Nicola, I want to hear more about what that last one means. So it seems really popular, but what are unknown unknowns, and how does machine learning actually help with that?
So the unknown unknowns are where you've got activity. So you've got a bank transaction monitoring system. There's activity going through it that you don't particularly know is bad. So we've got one good example of crypto, actually, where you've got big whales making a big splash, frankly. There's a lot of crypto activity going on. But because you don't know what you're looking for, it's really, really hard to create the right parameters to actually go and investigate and say, this is what the dodgy activity looks like. And this is where something like unsupervised machine learning might come in. It looks for patterns of activity, looks at the behavior, and looks for anomalies and outliers, where either a human doesn't have access to the data or just physically can't look at that broader picture. And that's where it comes in. It's spotting the gaps, the anomalous patterns in behavior, and pulling those out. So rules are great if you know what you're looking for. If you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to have a really hard time spotting it. And I think that's where AI really comes to the fore.
Great, thank you for that. And triage and risk scoring alerts is our second. Well, it's our tied winner here. Is this something that you've seen as a really effective solution in what you've been doing?
Well, I would say yes, because we have a solution that does that.
I don't want to throw too much of a softball your way there.
But I do think it's a great way of doing it, because it's so we're looking at triaging alerts. There's a hell of a lot of alerts, excuse my French, that comes in, and there are a lot of different factors that come into play. So I think where triaging alerts can be really helpful using AI is because it's not a simple rule set. You could have, 30 different models running over everything, mapping against each other, and risk scoring against itself. And I think that's really important to avoid bias. If you've only got one or two algorithms, that's bias in and of itself. You want different systems, different techniques, challenging against each other, creating that, a bit of friction is good. And I think that's where the triage and the risk scoring and alerting comes in, because you've got all these different approaches to looking at, does this alert matter? Can it be hibernated? And I think that's where the trust really starts building up, because if you've got your traditional and probably, generally speaking, trusted approach to your triage system, and then you've got another system kind of running alongside it saying, this is what should be at the top of your pool or pile of work, and this is why. I think that's where it starts really demonstrating its worth.
Yeah, no, some great points there. And I think probably, some of our attendees are experiencing that out there that are already implementing solutions in this space. So you mentioned inherent bias. I want to finish with that. We're almost out of time. In this space, we were talking about trust in data. We're talking about, whether or not you can rely on your tools. And it's important to note that criminals are very fast to game any kind of holes in data sets in tools, and they're early adopters of any kind of technology, including artificial intelligence. We've seen already AI-based attacks, whether that's bot-based attacks, more simple stuff to submit fraudulent applications, particularly on, online banking, mobile banking, or more elaborate things like fraudsters mimicking CEO's voice in kind of these elaborate business email compromise, or to assist business email compromise. And then looking ahead, we have things like deepfakes. Some of you probably saw the deepfake Tom Cruise videos. If you haven't, they're very entertaining, where they had an actor and then they basically layered Tom Cruise's face on top of it, and it's very effective. But looking ahead, as this technology becomes easier and more convenient, these are things that criminals are absolutely going to adopt. So we should expect that they're going to look for holes in our AI and our machine learning. And particularly if there is bias built into the system, does that create an opportunity for criminals to identify that bias, either through trial and error or corrupted insiders or something else, and game the system, know that the transaction monitoring or whatever it is won't flag this alert as this transaction as high risk or something like that. So is there any thought about criminals outwitting us through bias built into machine learning?
So the criminals already, like you say, they're already doing it. So if the criminals work hard to understand what the parameters of a bank are, which is why they're such a closely guarded secret. If a organized crime group knows that an alert's going to fire at a transaction of $5,000, they're going to make sure they have that transaction below $5,000. They're not stupid, and they have to only get lucky once or twice. As investigators, we need to be lucky all the time, to steal a phrase from my cybersecurity days. So, excuse me. So I think what's important here is that, yes, the criminals can understand it. They're already doing it. And if, yes, systems are too explainable and easy to hack, they're going to do it. But the beauty for me of AI and ML is that there's so many different techniques and approaches we can adopt that they can layer on each other and give you layers of defense. So one algorithm will have one set of parameters, another algorithm will have parameters over here, another one over here, and it all creates a sort of wall of defense, if you will. And I think that's where the strength really comes in. So you can figure out the parameters of one system. Are they going to be able to figure out the parameters of a deep learning system, a neural net system, supervised, unsupervised, etc., with all these different parameters? I think that's going to be a lot harder to do, and especially when those systems are designed to be able to spot subtle anomalies that a arguably clunkier, and by clunky I mean sort of hard and fast rules-based system might not. So I think that's where I think they're super complementary. But fundamentally, the bias is in the data. And, if the criminals figure out how to manipulate that data appropriately, then yes, they're going to be able to manipulate the system. So for me, It's about trying to stay that step ahead.
Yeah. I mean, we're never going to stop it all. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
I mean, that's the dream if we can. But
but certainly it sounds like we have some good tools coming online to make life difficult. We are unfortunately a few minutes over time. This has been a great conversation. I have one more question I'll just throw out there, and maybe Nicola, if you're able to give a quick answer to one of our attendees on the synthetic data point. To have the machine learning model built on synthetic data, the data it needs to mimic the customer's transaction activities. Without knowing the patterns of the real customer data, how can you build synthetic data?
So that's exactly what we're working on at the moment. So thank you, Frank. We're perfect one to end on. So what we're doing is basically going topology by topology. So we're not trying to mimic the entirety of the world. We're mimicking human trafficking for sexual exploitation, or drugs trafficking, or professional money laundering, or it's something specific. Understanding what a specific behavior looks like, and then using tools like agent-based simulation, where you basically, much like SimCity, you tell your actors to go off and do something, and they go and do it for you. We use agent-based simulation to go and create that customer data. So that is exactly mimicking what the customer data looks like. So it's realistic. It's saying, what does a family look like? What's their spending habits? What's their locale? What's their geography? What benefits might they get, et cetera, et cetera. And really building out that rounded pool of data. And then in this particular case, then layering in the bad actors and knowing what that activity looks like. But that's having those tools to create that data. It's not something I think we could do manually. We need tools like agent-based simulation to make that happen.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, and fascinating work taking place. I mean, it's just so exciting to see the innovation and all of the things that hopefully we can do here. And as we've said a couple of times, we have the tools, we have the technology. It's figuring out what to do with it, and then figuring out how to make sure that we can trust it, we can explain it, and we can implement it in human-based systems that empower human beings. So thanks, everybody, for being here for this conversation. It's been a real pleasure having you. And Nicola, big virtual round of applause. Really appreciate the expertise and the conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here. I've really enjoyed the discussion.
Excellent. And so much more to come over the next day here. We have an awesome session on crypto coming up shortly. There's actually a demo taking place. We mentioned crypto a couple times here. On this session, there's a demo taking place on for CipherTrace Armada. It's actually a product that is designed for financial institutions to get a handle on their crypto risk. So for anybody in the bank space, jump over there. That's in progress right now until 1:30. We'll be back on the main sessions at 1:30 with the state of global crypto adoption in 2021. So if you're wondering how people are using crypto around the world, what they're doing with it, what some of the risks are, and particularly what that looks like in Canada, the state of crypto use adoption in Canada, we're going to be doing all of that at 1:30. It's going to be a really interesting session, and I urge you to join us then. So thanks again to our lovely audience out there, and thanks again to Nicola. Please join us again for the next session at 1:30 and the terrorist financing session after that. And with that, we'll close it out. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers.